Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. There's been a lot of attention paid to the Ukraine-Russia war over the last couple of years, understandably so. A lot of attention paid to the cost to the American taxpayer. A lot of attention paid to the numbers of Russians and Ukrainians that have perished. A lot of attention paid to the people that have been injured, people that have lost their homes, what it's done to the supply chain, what it's done to energy prices. A lot of attention paid to the whole geopolitical nature of it. However, there's one aspect of it that I think has been almost entirely ignored. The fact that in this country, not in Ukraine, not in Russia, but in the United States of America, a country that has a First Amendment, a country that is supposed to believe in the free expression of journalists and of just about anybody, there has been a concerted effort to eradicate certain things people can see and hear. One of the victims of that has been Rick Sanchez. If that name sounds familiar, he has been a longtime journalist, probably best known for his tenure on CNN, but he's also done a lot of work on radio over the years, also been on MSNBC, Fox News. He's been a staple on radio, on television, and in print for a long time. And most recently, he was a host of a show on RT. That was the Russian news network. We're going to get into exactly what it was in a second. That was prohibited a couple of years ago. And we're going to get into why that might be problematic. Very, very pleased to welcome longtime journalist, author, and talk show host, Rick Sanchez. Rick, it's good to talk to you again. It's been a long time.
Good morning, Frank. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. The kid from Staten Island, right?
That's right. That's right. One of the few people that can appreciate the sleep deprivation that you went through for so many years. Believe me.
It's like my old pal Larry King always used to say, Ricky, I'm the kid from Brooklyn. I'm the Jewish kid from Brooklyn. You're the Cuban kid from Miami. Let's do this. Oh, I love Larry.
He was the greatest. One of my absolute favorites. All right. So you mentioned Larry King. That's sort of the heyday of CNN that a lot of people remember and that a lot of people may remember you from. You had one of the highest rated shows on CNN in prime time, sort of a predecessor to Anderson Cooper. A lot of folks are less familiar with the work that you did on RT. I was a guest on your show several times on RT. I found it to be one of the more unbiased programs in all of cable news. I enjoyed the show as both a viewer and as an occasional participant. How did you end up doing a show on RT? Is that the place that you go when CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC don't want to hire you for whatever reason? How did you get to RT?
Interestingly enough, after I left CNN, I got out of the news business and I started a healthcare company, and we took it public for $4.4 billion. So I'm not working in news because I need the money. I'm working in news because it's important to me. And I'm a big believer in issues that affect all of us in this world, including your kids and grandkids and mine as well. And that's war and peace. And I do believe that we should do everything possible to try and create better relations with a country like Russia. And I think one of the ways that we do that is through communication and through journalism. When you and I were growing up as kids, there was a show called Phil Donahue right there in New York City, one of the greatest shows I remember watching as a kid. He would interview Brezhnev when he came to the United Nations. He interviewed premiers from different... Ted Koppel used to have a show where he'd interview a Russian reporter once a week. and he would do interviews with spokespersons from the Iranian government, even though we were at odds with them. So you and I grew up in an era where we talked to everybody. We talked to our enemies. We talked to countries we liked and countries we didn't like. We didn't call, we didn't pick the winners and losers, and we didn't allow our government to do that. Well, now everything has changed, and you asked me how I got into RT, just like any other guy who's been in the news business. After I'd started my healthcare company, I got a call one day, and one of the people who called me was Larry King, of all people. Larry had been hired by RT to do his interview show, and he said, Rick, and I said, Larry, come on, Russians? This is weird, who knows? I mean, we all grow up thinking the Russians are, this, that, and the other, whatever, stereotypes. Well, Larry said, Rick, they do not interfere with anything I do. They give me complete independence. They allow me to produce my show, pick my guests, pick my segments. And I say, well, if those are the rules, you know what? I'll consider it. So I went up to Washington, met with the officials, and I said, I write my show, I produce my show, I pick my topics, I pick my staff. They said, you got it. We're not going to get in your way. And to be honest with you, Frank, they proved to be more adept at that. They respected my journalistic independence more than I received in terms of the same thing, controlling my narrative at CNN and at MSNBC and Fox. There were instances when they said, well, our editorial decision is we're going to do this. And I said, if that's your editorial decision, I'm out the door. They said, no. Okay, fine. We'll respect it. At CNN, it was the other way around. They told me what the hell I had to say based on what their goons in Washington had heard from, you know how that game is played.
Now, that's going to come as very surprising to a lot of people, especially on issues related to U.S.-Russian affairs, because I think a lot of our listeners know that RT is owned by the Russian government. So,
like the BBC.
Well, so a lot of folks are going to think, well, wait a minute, this is a media outlet that exists to be a mouthpiece for Putin. And you're saying that you never got fed any sort of talking points from Vladimir Putin or anybody else in the Russian government about this is the editorial viewpoint that you have to push forward each night.
To the contrary. Every day I would get up in the morning, I would choose a menu, I would pick from that menu, I would choose the stories I was going to do. My staff and I would pick the guests. They were all people like you and me who've been in the business here in South Florida or in New York, and, they've worked at different stations. There was one person who would be on the call, oftentimes when he made the call from Moscow, and he would give his insight. And good for him, He would say, here's kind of what I think. Good, we'll take that into account. No different than anybody else in the meeting, It was a very democratic process for picking the news. Much more so than the news that comes handed down when I worked at CNN and other cable networks here. That's why when the reason you're asking me about my situation is because back in September, the Biden administration decided that they would sanction the news entity, RT, basically saying they're not allowed to operate. They're not allowed to operate not only here in the United States, but anywhere else in the world, if they hire or use Americans.
I want to reiterate this because this is so important. So what we're talking about is they didn't just prohibit RT America, which used to be viewable on my local cable system. They didn't just say, all right, cable systems in this country can't air it anymore. They said that if Rick Sanchez or Frank Morano wants to do a show on RT, even if it's not even airing in the United States, that's prohibited?
You go to jail for appearing on their network, for sharing your opinion about something, whether it's pro-Ukraine or anti-Ukraine, pro-Trump or anti-Trump, pro-Biden or anti-Biden. It doesn't matter. You cannot go on their air. And if you were to ask me why, I'll tell you it's because the Biden administration has this feeling with this Russia phobia thing that the Russians like Trump more than they like him, so they wanted him off the air. They didn't want RT to be able to continue programming, because they didn't want somebody who liked Trump, essentially. And, my show reached 10 million people every day all over the world. So they decided to take it out. The funny thing is, you've been on my show. I'm not a pro-Trump guy. I'm not a pro-Democrat guy. Of course, I think, like most people, that Biden's a bit of a corpse and his policies are ridiculous. But still, I wasn't on the air, doing the Trump thing. But I called him as I saw him. When Trump did stupid stuff, I called it out. And obviously, I did the other as well. So I was known for being that kind of journalist. So canceling me and making it impossible for me as an American to practice my craft as a journalist, something that's guaranteed to me in the First Amendment of our Constitution, it just seems radical. It seems wrong. It's the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be the country that exalts free speech, I think.
No doubt about it. I completely agree. So what are you doing about it?
I am going to petition the U.S. government, OFAC, to
and what's
give
OFAC
me
for people that don't know?
Good, great question. I barely know what it is. The Office of Foreign Accounting, I believe. I may be off. It's a very legal process. They're the people who one of the many thousands of government agencies I hope we can kind of get rid of, or at least dwindle down, where a bunch of bureaucrats sit around deciding which country, person, or company around the world, and there's tens of thousands of them, we are going to sanction next. And they basically just cancel entire companies, sometimes countries, and sometimes people, based on whether what they believe is in agreement with the United States. Now, there are, drug dealers, terrorists. There are people out there who need to be sanctioned, I imagine. I'm not anti-sanction. I'm just anti the abuse of sanctions or using sanctions as a political weapon, which is what I kind of get the sense that they're doing here.
I just looked it up. It is technically it's called the Office of Foreign Assets Control as part of Treasury. So you're going to petition OFAC to essentially lift this ban. Now, what happens?
And it is, to be fair, it is a legal remedy. I'm not making this up. I mean, for people, I'll give you an example. Let's suppose you're a mechanic or you're a carpenter, and you work in a building of a company that was just sanctioned because it was part of China Huawei or something, and you're just working there as a carpenter doing asbestos removal. You're going to say to the government, "Wait a minute, I'm not allowed to get a paycheck from these people. I'm just a carpenter." And they're going to say, "Well, we're going to give you an exception." Well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm saying, look, I'm not a company. I'm not a political actor. I'm just a journalist. They hired me to provide journalism. I'm providing journalism. How can you stop me from doing that? And I would hope that the new administration, a guy I grew up with down here in South Florida, Marco Rubio, who's about to be the new Secretary of State, and the Trump administration and some of the players there, who I think are much more astute on this kind of stuff than the previous administration. That's my personal opinion. I think they'll look at this and other cases like mine and say, this is ridiculous. We should not be canceling people, and especially journalists.
This podcast is supported by Progressive, a leader in RV insurance. RVs are for sharing adventures with family, friends, and even your pets. So if you bring your cats and dogs along for the ride, you'll want Progressive RV Insurance. They protect your cats and dogs like family by offering up to $1,000 in optional coverage for vet bills in case of an RV accident, making it a great companion for the responsible pet owner who loves to travel. See Progressive's other benefits and more when you quote RV insurance at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Pet injury is an additional coverage and subject to policy terms.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
Your snacking routine can get a little dull. Time for a light and fit remix. Like a crunchy storm of graham cookies, caramel pearls, and dark chocolate, showering down into a smooth, creamy yogurt. Enjoy 3 light and fit remix varieties with craveable flavors and up to 120 calories and 10 grams of protein per 4.5-ounce serving. See remixyogurt.com.
Plan on flying? It's time to upgrade to a Real ID. Because in order to board domestic flights, your driver's license or state-issued ID must be a Real ID, or you'll need another acceptable form of identification. So don't wait. Find out how to get your Real ID at tsa.gov/RealID. That's tsa.gov/RealID. Or visit your local DMV. And then you'll be cleared for takeoff.
Oh, no doubt about it. Now, just to play devil's advocate, a lot of people that may disagree, the First Amendment protects free speech, but they'll say it doesn't compel the government to amplify foreign state-funded media. Why should the U.S. government be required to permit platforms like RT to operate freely within its borders?
Well, because if they were to cancel RT, the next question is, who's next? Why is China allowed to operate? Are we shutting them down? How about Al Jazeera? Should we shut them down? What about Fox News when a Democrat's in office? Should we shut them down? Should we not allow them to have an office, let's say, in London because they're perpetrating an anti-Biden story and sharing it with the rest of the world, as they seem to think that I was doing, even though I was not? The bottom line is, from a purely humanist standpoint, we need to talk to the rest of the world. We're going through a situation right now, and I think your listeners probably know this because they're astute, where the world is turning against us. The world is literally building or forging relationships that are anti-U.S. It's called the Global South Community. It's called BRICS. And with each new BRICS conference, this new consortium of countries, which is very different from the different groupings that we've always thought, the G7 and stuff like that, is extremely popular. Countries are dying to get into this organization. So now, because the U.S. has had policies where we've shut these countries down, those countries, I mean Brazil, South Africa, Russia, India, China, Iran, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, I could go on and on and on, are now building or forging these groupings that are basically trying to take on the U.S. and say, we're tired of you guys treating us like this. And while I'm not agreeing with what these countries are doing, I can understand their perspective, but we don't. And I don't want to see my country, this country that I love, that I left the communist country and my parents brought me over here to, become the country that has less power, less authority, and have other countries start to run roughshod over us. And I think that's kind of what's happened during the last 4 years.
One of the criticisms that I used to get, and by the way, I've heard what you said about editorial independence on RT, not just from you and not just from Larry King when he was still alive, but from William Shatner, who had a show on RT, from Jesse Ventura, who had a show about RT. They all describe an editorial process which was completely independent of any sort of interference, let alone any sort of pressure to put on propaganda. But one of the criticisms that I used to get...
In fact, let me just add that they see, you know what they did, Frank? They wanted to better understand the American point of view. They wanted to get why Americans thought the way they did. So they sought out to hire people like Rick Sanchez and Larry King and Jesse Ventura and guys like this, and they would ask us, why are the Democrats like this? Why are there only two parties? Explain to our viewers this. Explain, so I was in the exalted position of being able to explain not only to Russians, but to the rest of the world, why American politics was the way it was, why our ideologies were the way they are, why we had the good thing, the good and the bad and the ugly about our country. And, that's a good thing. I started this conversation saying when you and I were growing up, that's what Ted Koppel did. That's what the nightly news used to do.
You'd see
we
Vladimir.
don't even cover those countries anymore.
Right.
You'll never see Xi's speech or Putin's speech or Modi's speeches. We don't even know who these people are, other than just characters created by these idiots on cable news.
Yeah, no, you'd go on Donahue and you'd see Vladimir Posner on there talking with Barry Farber. You'd see real different points of view and different worldviews. And now, especially with Tucker Carlson off of the air, there's nowhere that you really see that sort of divergent point of view on American cable news.
In fact, pardon my passion, but I just I've got this new podcast I started because I'm bored, so I decided to go on the air, and I call it, journalistically speaking, because I'm a real journalist. I mean, I've got 2 Peabodys and a DuPont and 5 Emmys, and I've interviewed 4 presidents and Gorbachev and Castro, and I've done a bunch of stuff, So, and I'm proud of that, and I think we need more people like me. But when you turn on cable news, you know what you get? You get Cuomo's brother, and you get the lady who used to be the spokesman for President Trump on Fox, and the lady who used to be the spokesperson for President Clinton on MSNBC, and the guy who used to be the talking head for Obama on CNN. And all of these people are government shills who've never covered a story, never really worked in communications, never had a job. And yet they go from being the mouthpiece of our government to being a news anchor.
No, it's incredible.
Tell me how that isn't state TV.
Yeah, no, I can't make that argument at all. But one of the criticisms that I used to get occasionally when I would go on RT is that I would be accused of legitimizing a state propaganda machine. What do you say, and I'm sure you've heard this criticism before, what do you say to those who believe that your association undermines your credibility as an independent journalist for that same reason?
I would argue that there's nothing more important for the sake of war and peace than understanding all countries in the world, including their perspectives, whether we consider them the folks we like or the folks we don't like. And the older I get, the more I find out that some of those folks I was told we had to like are really not all that likable at all. And I think that that's the problem that we have with our, foreign policy right now. I will also say, and I think this is really important, that I think that if you want to talk about state propaganda, I think CNN is more guilty of state propaganda, and so are others in our news media than anybody who works in Russia or many other countries. And they do that through interlocking by having board members from certain corporations, be it Google or Raytheon, on the board of these networks, who darn well influence the decisions that are then made in those networks in terms of coverage. You also know darn well, because I experienced this firsthand, that little fiefdom in Washington, D.C., which is the political bureau of ABC and NBC and CNN, where I worked, they will call the main office and tell the CEO, hey, tell Sanchez to stop saying or criticizing this or stop doing that. And there is a real commingling of editorial decisions with business decisions and with officials in places like the State Department and other government offices controlling what we say and do. It's why, for example, I'll give you a hard example of this. Your viewers will probably, or your listeners will say, yeah, you turn on CNN, you turn on these things. Who do they interview when they're asking questions of war and peace? The same idiots who led us into the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, guys who failed, the same guys who went in there and made that decision for us to go to war in Iraq are now on the air being used as experts discussing whatever conflagration they're talking about anywhere in the world.
It's amazing.
That's like inviting a head coach who had a 1-15 season and ask him how to win a game.
I want to ask you about football in a second. But before I let you go, I don't want to necessarily revisit the whole situation because it's a long story and it's kind of ancient history. But about 15 years ago, you made some comments on Sirius XM radio, which resulted in a lot of people calling for your head. Back then, we didn't really have the phrase cancel culture. These days, I hear that phrase almost every day, and not just by the right. I hear it from a lot of folks on the left as well. Do you believe that you were an early victim of cancel culture, even if there wasn't a term for it at the time?
Absolutely. I was probably the first person to be canceled, unnecessarily because I said something that was stupid and that I didn't say. I didn't say it out of meanness. I said it out of ignorance, perhaps. I said it because I didn't grow up with certain sensibilities that perhaps I should have had. So when I was saying the news media needs to be more diverse and we need to have more, rednecks from Alabama and Cubans from Miami and Mexicans from LA and Puerto Ricans from the Bronx or whatever the hell the point I was trying to make. And then I made the point that Jews had done very well in the news media. I mangled it. Then I got into an argument with, Jon Stewart. So in the end, I said something I probably should have said. It should have been a learning experience. It was for me. I went to synagogues all over the country. I apologized publicly. I went to Israel. I did everything possible to try and make it right, but it wasn't enough. They said, no, that's it. You made that mistake, and it doesn't matter if you apologize. You can never work in this business again.
Wow,
really? And it's what happened. I'm sorry. I mean,
And I imagine it might have played out a bit differently today, given that there's been a little bit of a backlash against cancel culture. But obviously, there's no way to know.
Yeah.
Do you not think so? I mean, what do you think? If that happened today, would things have gone down as they did?
Well, first of all, for me personally, it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because if you are the kind of people like you and I are, it makes you better. You find you're going to close that door? I'm looking for a bigger one. Mm-hmm. And I did, and I found a $1 billion door. So, because that's the way we are. We're, if you're a fighter, it's like I tell my kids, it's like, whenever you fall down in life, you know what you should do? Find the guy who tripped you and go thank him, because he just did you one hell of a favor. And that's kind of what it was for me. Do I think I would have survived it more today because the appetite is a little different? Probably. I think people now look at Donald Trump. I mean, I happen to think I'm in kind of agreement with a lot of his policies, but as a man, moralistically, he is extremely troubled, to say the least, just judging by some of the things that he's done in his life that I would hopefully never do. But, he has this exigence about him, this way of fighting through these things, and I kind of admire it.
Absolutely, I feel like a lot of people that can't stand his policies. That's an aspect of him that a lot of them can relate to. Lastly, Rick, I know you've done a little bit of football announcing over the years on radio, and I know you follow football. You've been pretty tough on Tom Brady as a football announcer. What's going on? Is this you being jealous? Is this you being a Brady hater? Why are you so tough on Tom Brady?
Well, first of all, because he's probably one of the greatest quarterbacks who ever lived, and being a Miami Dolphins fan, that was tough. I mean, that guy just destroyed us. So yes, there it's a part of that makes me despise this guy for what he did. Now, here's what I'm trying to say. I think, and I think I tweeted something like this the other day. This is a guy who, when I saw him playing the quarterback position, he was so easy on the eyes. He had the perfect release, the perfect pocket presence. He had everything. Now I'm trying to listen to him do a show, and maybe it's because I communicate for a living like you do. He seems halting. He seems uncomfortable. He's not insightful. He uses simplistic terminology. And I'm thinking, oh, this poor guy's terrible. He's ruining the experience for me. He's literally hurting my ears when I watch him do a game. And I said that, and you know what? I kind of stand behind it. Maybe he's going to get good, okay? I want him to. I'm pulling for the guy. But right now, let me just say it. He sucks.
Rick Sanchez, a guy that never pulls any punches, whether it's discussing free speech and the media or discussing Tom Brady. Hey, Rick, I hope we can do this again. Let's hope that things improve on the free speech front in the next administration. In any event, let's be sure to chat again soon.
God bless you, man. I enjoyed it. Take care, Frank.
Me
See
too.
you, buddy.
Thank you, Rick Sanchez. If you want to comment on any portion of our discussion, you can certainly give me a call, 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.